Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself and Paul Hoppe are kind of giving you a triple header. We're going to be doing a listener feedback episode, by which I mean that we got a great question about Guardians of the Galaxy, which we're mostly going to be talking about, and the questions about Guardians of the Galaxy and animal rights, which is something that's very dear to Paul Hoppe's heart, something that is very dear to my heart, in large part because of my friendship with Paul. And so we're kind of doing both of those things. We're doing Guardians, we're doing animal rights, we're doing listener feedback. We will have another piece of listener feedback to talk about as well. All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. I'm Matthew. I'm your host. As I said, I'm joined by former host, former regular guest, now semi-regular guest, Paul Hoppe. Paul, how are we doing tonight?
Doing pretty well. Yeah, it's getting up in the 90s every day in Vegas now, so it's not my favorite time of year, but
fair. Yeah, we're a balmy 60 here in Minnesota, so I'm quite loving the weather here. But we'll have 90 for 2 weeks. Well, you
right? Yeah. So. Sounds unbearable.
Exactly. Well, this is going to be kind of an interesting episode, and I think the best way to start it is with a piece of listener feedback we got. Because I will admit, I had not been planning to watch the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie. They've never been my favorite part of the MCU. I really didn't like the second movie. And I'm a little bit on MCU burnout. And I don't mean that in any way to be critical of people who still love everything the MCU does. I still like a lot of things. But like, for example, I haven't seen the new Ant-Man movie yet. I just didn't really feel a need to. I've also just been feeling like I enjoy movies a lot more when I can sit at home and not go to the theaters. But then I was finding the discussion about the movie online really interesting. And then we got this listener email from Sophia Lim. And Sophia writes, "Hi, Matthew. I love your Superhero Ethics podcast, and I'm writing to ask if you plan to do an episode talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I love hearing you and Paul Hoppe talk about the... I think hearing you and Paul Hoppe talk about this movie would be a great discussion, especially because Paul is such a big proponent of animal rights, and this movie has a lot of animal cruelty in it. I know you don't often cover movies right when they're released in theaters, but I hope that sometime in the future you'll consider an episode on it. Have a great day, Sophia Lim, she, they." Which, by the way, also awesome, including your pronouns. As someone who uses pronouns that were not what people would expect of me, they, them, I always just really appreciate when people just kind of normalize, like, everyone should just use pronouns, tell us what your pronouns are. So, putting that aside, though, so I decided to go watch the movie, and big spoilers for well, we're not going to spoil too much of the significant plot details, but I think we're going to spoil some of the general themes, and which are that the movie includes, as Sophia said, quite a lot of animal cruelty, but it is not presented from an exploitative standpoint. It's really presented from a standpoint of, hey, people watching this, like, the way humans treat animals in our own world, let alone in this world, is wrong and bad. And I think that's where really we're going to talk about it from. But we're going to do something interesting, because we're going to be talking about this movie and mostly talking about the issues that it raises. And one of the two of us, Paul, hasn't seen the movie yet. And I think that alone is a really interesting question that helps to get into why we're talking about this today and the kind of discussion we're going to have. And so, Paul, let me kind of just start by asking you this. Like, you're someone who is on record as, talking a lot about you get really upset sometimes when animals are treated poorly in the fiction that we watch, and you really want them to be treated better. Here's a movie that is about animals being treated poorly, but that's kind of the whole point, because it's about drawing attention to something that you, and I think a lot of other folks, myself included, really care about in terms of the entitlement that humans have towards animals and animal lives and animal suffering and all the like. So why haven't you seen this movie?
Yeah, so
other than the fact that you're not going to go, you don't go to theaters in general, but like,
sure. So
why are you planning to not see this movie even when it comes out on digital?
Yeah, so like you, I've got my share of MCU burnout where I'm just like, I'm just going to put it down for a moment. Maybe I'll watch like all the movies in a row in a year or something. Like it took me forever to watch Wakanda Forever, and I finally watched it and I was like, okay, that's supposedly the end of a phase or something. So maybe that's a good point to kind of just be like, I'll take a break. But also, I haven't seen a movie in the theater since Birds of Prey. So,
yeah,
it's been a minute. And I thought about like, would I go to see this movie specifically so that I could talk about it? And then you brought up the idea of like, you could watch it and then we could talk about kind of some things that happened and how it handles things. Right. And I think that can often, like, I think sometimes that leads to a really good discussion, right? Like we've done that with some Star Wars novels where I'm just the kind of like illiterate, like I didn't read the book, like you all tell me about the book and I'll ask some questions. And, I can actually read though. But so here though, there's another level of, aside from, not really wanting to go see a movie in a theater, aside from not being super amped to see another MCU movie right now. Also, if there's a lot of depictions of animal cruelty in it, like, given my understanding about the way the movie handles that, I think it's great that it exists. And I think hopefully it will have an effect on people. But I'm like, I don't feel like I'm that audience of, I don't think I'm the person who needs something to have that effect on me. And it to me, it would likely just be an unpleasant experience for most of it. And, I mean, it's sort of like seeing images of violence in our own world, right? Where, it's important to know that these things happen. And sometimes seeing something for the first time can have a profound effect. And however, I think at a certain point, it's like, all right, that's enough. I understand that this exists. I feel it on a visceral level, and I don't need a constant visual reminder of it, to keep in my mind that like, yeah, that's a thing and it's awful and I want to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I remember first being a little surprised, but the more I thought about it, that makes total sense to me, because I know, like, in a similar way, when I met my partner, Mary, she, like I, is queer, and we were talking a lot about queer themes and stuff, and she was saying, like, yeah, she didn't want to see any fiction where characters died of AIDS, or died of gay bashing, and the point being, like, that she'd been exposed to lots and lots of that and had really, been immersed in that world and was a part of that world herself, and as a person, an activist, and a person who believed in all these things, and was like, maybe it's great if other people are seeing this, but I don't need to see it again to be reminded of why this is terrible.
Yeah. And
I know I've heard similar things from, like, black creators on here who say things like, look, like, I don't need to watch another video of someone like me being shot by the police or something like that. And
I'll say I feel the same way. Like, I don't need to see another shot of someone being shot by the police. Like, I get it. It's horrible. Like, let's do something about it.
Yeah. Like, I think that's the thing, is because I think, like, and here's the thing of, like, I don't want to judge this for anybody else or say, like, this group should always do it, this group should never do it, whatever. But, like, to me, I mean, watching this movie, I definitely had a visceral reaction of, like, being reminded of just how horrible our world is to animals, and everything from, like, the the meat industry and then the way animals are treated there, but especially, like, what this movie really kind of about is animal experimentation and things like that. And in horrible timing, for example, Britain just changed their regulations to start allowing businesses to do experiments on animals again, which I guess none of them had seen the movie. But, like, and yeah, to me, like, I was still at a point where, like, yeah, the movie, it was hard to watch at times. I think not as hard as it might have been for others, because I have seen a lot worse with animals in terms of my own research of these things. But yeah, but I had that visceral reaction, like, okay, this is a reminder to me that I need to be doing more on this subject. And I think that there's something to be said for, like, here's what I would say, and I'm wondering if you would feel the same way. To me, that means I don't think the movie went too far. Like, I think it is a good thing that the movie is doing that, in the same way that, like, I don't want to stop having movies about, people dying of AIDS, especially gay men in the 80s and 90s, because it happened all the time, and it's important for people to see that and to know that and to not hide from that.
Yeah.
It's just, like, it's important to see, racism existing and sexism existing and stuff like that. But kind of what is your feeling of it, of, like, if you hear that there's a movie that is about animal rights and is about sort of pushing people to do more animal compassion, and it involves a lot of scenes of animal cruelty, does that strike to you as, like, okay, that's, even if it's not what you want to see, that's probably a good thing to help move people? Is it something like you'd rather not have that in the movie? What's kind of your feeling there?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, there's a whole thing about, like, movies that are centered around trying to make a point that I think is just fundamentally challenging in like how to go about making a movie. And I tend to not very often enjoy those movies that have some point that's like front and center, you know?
Yeah.
I like there to be themes, and I really want movies to make people think about things, right? And then kind of people can end up where they end up. But again, I haven't seen this movie, so I won't speak to how it handles that. But in terms of,
and, let me actually say something about that. And I think that's something I should be very clear for this for the audience. Due to that, I think what we're going to try and do here is use Guardians as a jumping off point to talk about these topics in general. Yeah. Because I think, my saying to you, well, here's my interpretation of what happens. So do you think this movie did a good job?
Right.
Like that's silly.
Right.
Like, because it's all going to be through my own experience and my own view of it. So, but this is not like in a question like this, I'm not saying like, so do you think James Gunn used cruelty to animals well or not well? Because you don't know. You haven't seen it.
Exactly.
But just, okay, so this movie did that. Let's get to the general question then.
Yeah. So like, I think war movies should have blood in them. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I think, especially anti-war movies. I mean, I guess pro-war movies, you probably don't want to show the blood. You know, you just want to see the enemies getting blown up, and then you're like, yay! But, you know, I mean, having recently watched the Top Gun movies, I'm like, oh, there's no blood there, you know? Yeah. But as opposed to, say, Private Ryan, or I tried to watch All Quiet on the Western Front, and I started it, and I was just like, not today. You know, I was like, I'm sure this might be a great movie, and it's in German, and I love that, and I'd really enjoy watching it someday, but like that wasn't the day, you know?
Yeah.
And
I remember, so there's a tangent, but we can go back to it. Ignoring the last 5 minutes, to me, one of the things that made 95% of Saving Private Ryan such a good movie was that until that point, the only war movies that were really very bloody and gory were Vietnam movies.
Right.
And there was this idea of like, Vietnam is a morally questionable war, so war looks ugly and terrible. World War II was the noble good war, so the warfare looks like noble and good, and when the people die, they, say a quirky line to their buddy as they, die, or they just sit and smoke a cigarette that a pretty nurse gives them in the hospital or whatever it is. And so to see, like, this is World War II. We're fighting the literal Nazis, and it's still bloody and horrible and terrible. It was kind of groundbreaking in a way. Anyway, that very much on a tangent, but just wanted to underline that. Yeah.
I mean, like, all war is hell, and just because you're fighting the bad guys doesn't make you always unequivocally the good guys, right? Like, impossible. Like you can't do horrible things as well, which I think World War II actually demonstrates quite well. But so I think if you tried to make a movie like this and you kind of just like talked about the horrible things, like that would make it maybe easier for me to watch. Right. And I think there's a place for that. But I think there's also a place for being very explicit, And I mean, I think this is something that comes up also with like movies that cover like sexual assault. Right. Where I think a lot of people feel like a lot of times those sorts of scenes are very exploitative. And also just a lot of people are like, I don't want to watch that. Right. Yeah. And I think that's fair. But I also think that there's a place for showing the horrors of anything that you're trying to show the horrors of, right. And in terms of the horrors of animal cruelty in blockbuster movies, like it hasn't really been done a whole lot, you know, often there's an amount of animal cruelty that just goes like laughed at even. Right. Yeah. And so I think that's, it's pretty bold to say like, this is an MCU film. This is a Disney film, I mean, in terms of the parent company, like, and I mean, Disney's always had these like anthropomorphic animals that are like their main characters, So it actually kind of feels like maybe that's the right company to like be like, no, we're going to do something that's for mass audiences. Right. And we're going to show the reality of, and of course it's not actually the reality because it's in space and,
talking raccoons and
raccoons and all this. Right. But showing, I mean, I read a few articles about it, and I know like PETA gave James Gunn like an award for like, making a movie like this and getting details right. Like, the animals having numbers tattooed on them and being referred to by numbers, right? Not by names. And,
Because that literally happens in a lot of places where animals are experimented on or feed animals and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I do think there's value to like hitting people with the full force of it. You know, I think there's value there. I think it's the sort of thing where it's like, I don't want everything about animal rights or that's against animal cruelty to vividly show that, because I think there's also value in having things that some other people might want to watch and be like, oh, that's too much. I don't want to watch that one. But like, then maybe there's another entry point for them. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And I do think, and again, here, I'm going to talk about Guardians, not to ask you to evaluate it, but just to give some context and lead into a larger conversation. Like what you're saying about the movies that make a point. I tend to be a little bit fonder of those than a lot of other people, but even I would agree. Like, if it feels too much like you're making the point instead of making a movie, it's a problem. In this, it feels very earned because it is primarily what we're seeing is Rocket's backstory.
Right.
And Rocket's a character who we've now had for 3 Guardians movies, as well as significant parts of other movies, particularly the Avengers movies. And we've always gotten some hints that he had terrible things happen to him in the past, and that is part of why he is who he is. And so getting now to have that really explored, and they, I won't spoil it, but they do some like character things where basically like they have to learn more about his history in order to help him in the present. It wound up making it feel very earned and very real to the story.
Yeah, and I think that's super important whenever you're trying to like make a point. It's like, is this point kind of something that you wanted to make and then you came up with a story to try and make that point? And then often I think you're going to get something that feels very artificial. Or did you have a story to tell and there's a point in the story? Like there's a point to the story, right? And so it's organic storytelling that involves making a larger point. I think that's always going to, first of all, it's just going to be a better story. And I think when you have a better story, it's going to hit better. Like your point is going to land better when it's not like you're just like writing an essay, right? Yeah. And then like having some characters read the essay. It's like, no, this is a story and it shows you, right? As opposed to just tells you about something.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that like that question there is one that is incredibly subjective. And then I think I think a lot of factors will decide how much an individual person thinks that the story has earned the points that it's making. And I think a lot of that has to do with storytelling itself. I also do think a lot of that has to do with how comfortable you are with the point that's being made. And I certainly think that it is one of the easiest ways to dismiss a movie that has something like that is like, oh, it's just pandering. Like they're just writing female characters or black characters or whatever to pander instead of like, and I obviously have a bias in that particular question and lean pretty hard to one side. But I think I'm not trying to say I can't draw where the objective line is, but I think that it's important to say like that is a really important question to ask, as well as to say that like a lot of questions, there's also a lot of disingenuousness that can sometimes go into that question being brought up.
Yeah, for sure. But like, I think it's a legitimate question, and like a lot of nuance, it gets weaponized these days, right? Yeah. Like, but yeah, there's definitely movies that make points that I totally agree with, and I'm like, I think you're doing disservice to this point, you know, or just are hard to watch.
As a tangent, but I think it's helpful. I'd love to hear from you. What is an example of one where you think the point was really well integrated into the story, and one where you were like, I agree with you, but can you just tell me a story instead of beating me over the head with this?
Right. Well, so like the first Avatar movie, not the Airbender, but like the Avatar movie, like, you know, I mean, yes, it's a savior story also, but it's also anti-colonialist, right? It's anti-exploiting a planet for its resources and not caring what you're doing to the population there. And like, I agree with that point. Like, yeah, don't do that. But like, I did. It felt heavy-handed, and I just didn't really enjoy the story very much. You know, I mean, it looked pretty, but in terms of one that really does a good job of making those points, I mean, I have 2 examples, neither of which are, I think, primarily trying to make those points. One of them is going to be Andor, where I don't think Andor is like, this is the point I want to make. I don't think Tony Gilroy was like, I want to make these points. Right. I think Tony Gilroy is a person who's read a lot of stuff and thought about a lot of things and had a story to tell and is telling that story and integrating a lot of those points into that story. Right. Yeah. And so I think those things also, like, the story is literally about like fighting against authoritarianism. So when you're, you know, and this colonial power, right? The empire. Yeah. And so it's like, it's not too on the nose to call it what it is, right? It's like you can literally just show it because that is actually what the story was always about, right? From the first Star Wars movie. And then another movie that I actually, I'm going to see whether I can get you to finally try watching this one again. But I would say Grosse Pointe Blank. Like, Grosse Pointe Blank is about a hitman who goes to his 10-year high school reunion. And like, sure, you know, but, and it's a comedy, you know, but it's got a lot of like, you know, leftist, like anti-authoritarian, anti-war type messaging in it. That's just kind of like worked in there. I feel like not super heavy handed, partially because it's a comedy, you know, but, I think a lot of times, I mean, you can have something like Andor where it's like, it is about fighting against an empire, quite literally. But I think also sometimes you can just have characters who have certain viewpoints and they can express those viewpoints in ways that at least are going to make the audience think. And when you do, I think that's sometimes I think that's potentially more effective because it's just like you're telling a compelling story and then you're weaving some things into it, you know? And I guess if you want to go with the MCU, like, I feel like The Winter Soldier does a pretty decent job of that. Yeah. You know?
I think it's fair. Yeah, like I'd say, I think the MCU has been, for the most part, pretty good about these things. Not always by any means. But like, to me, one of the ones that I would go to most often is Ms. Marvel. Because, I'm sorry, Ms. Marvel, I definitely would.
Captain Marvel is what you were going to say.
No, I got confused. I do mean Ms. Marvel, although Captain Marvel, I think, also does it.
Okay.
But, because to me, in Ms. Marvel, like, it's about a teenage girl who is also Pakistani American, who is also Muslim. And I don't think you could tell her story without Islamophobia coming in some way. I don't think you could tell her story without the particular issues of immigration and her family. And that partition plays a role in her family's story. I felt like I learned a lot more about those worlds by watching that show. I felt like I had a lot more empathy and a lot more like, oh, okay, I can see this gives me a better understanding of a lot of other, you know, Pakistani American artists or things like that. But I never felt like the show was hitting me over the head with it because it just felt like it's just the story of this teenage girl who gets these powers and here's the cool things that happened.
Yeah, I'll co-sign that. I felt like the marketing was like a little on the nose. And then like the actual show itself was just good. Aside from like the antagonists, I thought were by far the weakest part. But team protagonist was fantastic.
Yeah. So pulling it back to Guardians, one of the things that I thought was interesting was as the movie went on, there were a couple times where I had this moment of, okay, well, actually, I'm going to back up here a second and use the example that you just talked about before. The first movie, Avatar, I agree with you. I thought I appreciated that the movie was trying to tell a kind of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist story, but by doing it through what felt to me this white savior narrative, also, by the way, a very ableist narrative, but it's a whole other story, it really kind of undercut that message. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of things in this Guardians movie that I would watch and I would feel like, God damn it, Paul. If I hadn't talked with Paul so much, I would just be like, wow, this is awesome animal rights stuff. But the conversations you and I have had have started to get me to see these other things that undercut the message some. And then the movie would directly address that thing and change it. Mm-hmm. And so I want to kind of go through a couple of these and just use them to talk about, like, if I'm kind of right, and sort of how you would think about a trope like this and get into those general thoughts about that. Not the am I right thing, but just for that conversation. Like, I'll give you the first example. We start with basically Rocket as a young raccoon with kind of a much younger voice is with a couple of other animals who've all been through something similar that they are now I don't know if sentient is the right word, but
the word is like verbal, right?
Yeah, I mean,
they can speak
now
English.
They're now verbal, and the implication of the movie is certainly that they're now capable of a level of intellectual understanding that they weren't before.
Yeah, sapience is the word that's actually more. Although that's they have a more human-like level of intelligence is pretty much.
I think that's a good way to
look for, right?
And that's exactly kind of the point is, and a lot of things that were done to them, which were like there's a lot of body horror elements that are in it, which again were I thought really good because some of them are hard to look at. They don't look cute. It looks like a very cute animal that horrible things have been done to.
Right.
So on the one hand, they're not just saying, hey, look, the cute animal deserves sympathy. But they were showing that the sapient animals deserve sympathy. And then later, they specifically make a point of, like, some people only want to rescue those animals. And Rocket, I was like, no. All those animals that haven't been experimented on yet, like, we need to rescue them as well.
Yeah.
And as well as also introducing a couple of other animal characters who have not been experimented on like that. They're not verbal. They're not interacting with people on that kind of a level, but they still become full characters in the show, in the movie, who I think are just deserving of sympathy and empathy.
Yeah, and to me that's critical, right? Because if you only take the animals that have, enhanced intelligence or whatever, like, for all of the animal rights and whatever that I'm going to talk about, like, humans, as far as we know, are more intelligent than most animals, right? Like maybe dolphins are actually similar, right? And I mean, this is something that's maybe hard to measure and hard to really know, but, adult dogs tend to have intelligence similar to like human 2-year-olds, right? And I mean, humans aren't born with the intelligence that humans end up with, that adult humans have, right? The brain develops over time. And I think if you basically are just like, well, these animals deserve, rights, or just, for me, the word rights isn't even like the word I want to use, just like deserve decent treatment, respect, right? Deserve to be treated like they have feelings. Then it's like, if somebody needs to be able to tell you that they have feelings for you to respect their feelings, like you're not going very far to, try and understand anyone. Right. Yeah. And so bringing in, the other animals who have not achieved like adult human-like intelligence. And that's not to say that 5-year-old or 10-year-old humans don't also have a, increased level of intelligence, but like that's not the thing that is why they deserve respect and decency, right? It's because they are feeling like sentience is the word that often is used to mean human-like intelligence, but sentience literally means the ability to feel. And, basically regardless of intelligence level, like animals feel, right? I mean, it's specifically feel suffering, but also joy and other emotions, right? And just because they don't have words, like they can't tell you with words, but that doesn't mean that they can't express it. I mean, a cat purring, like, what does that mean? You know what that means, right?
Spend any time with a dog that has had, a really, not great owner in its past. And the colloquial term I would want to use is that the dog has something akin to PTSD. I don't want to trivialize that actually very real condition, which I do have, but and so I don't have any idea if like the brain chemistry is similar, but certainly in terms of like the way early trauma can severely affect a human for the rest of its life, early trauma can definitely affect a dog and for the rest of its life. And I imagine many other animals, but dogs are the ones that I think we're the most aware of in that way.
Yeah, because dogs are like the most human-facing animals, right? At least in certain cultures, right? And I think saying it that's PTSD is, to me, that's not trivializing, human PTSD. It's like, yeah, okay, maybe you don't want to offer a clinical diagnosis, right?
Right.
But it's like, well, that is literally post-traumatic, and there's something going on, right?
Yeah, stress is a big part of it, certainly.
Exactly. And you could call it a disorder because there's challenges that, the dog is facing that then anybody trying to interact with the dog is gonna have a hard time, right? And there's a lot of wonderful people who work with dogs and other animals who've been through things like this, right? And actually, there's a Batman story, right? About that's where Ace comes from, basically.
Yeah.
In Batman Beyond, and but obviously in our world, this is something that happens a lot, and there's people who try and deal with this and help animals heal, like, emotionally, right? And if you can see that an animal can be emotionally scarred by cruelty and mistreatment, then, like, obviously you know that there's suffering going on, right?
Yeah.
And I think the practice of, like, referring to animals who are experimented on by numbers is specifically so that the experimenters don't have to feel the same level of attachment that they might if they, called them Mike or, like, Betsy or something.
It's a way of shutting off the natural empathy or compassion that a person would feel. And I think we've talked before about how that's something that happens, like, that's a way that we justify cruelty towards other humans, and everything from, like, racism and sexism and, like, myth telling of, like, all these people. And that's everything from, like, the way people talk about trans people today to, like, the way the U.S. Army was taught about Japanese people as these, like, horrible brutes. And it happens in all cultures and stuff like that.
There's two things, actually, that I kind of want to throw in here. One is that I think this is another reason that people have such an easier time being awful to people who don't speak their language and being anti-immigration and anti-immigrant and anti-people who live in the United States but maybe don't speak English as much, right?
And I would just add to that, and also very ableist towards people who don't communicate well.
Absolutely.
Disabilities and same thing.
100%. Exactly. Like, the idea, like, oh, well, if you can't explain to me, everything about how you're feeling, I can just ignore your feelings,
right.
which is terrible. Like, and it's not like somebody needs to be able to use words in a language you understand to explain certain things, to communicate certain fundamental things, right? Obviously, there's not going to be as much nuance if you don't share a language. But and then the second one is that when we talk about things like slavery, when we talk about things like the Holocaust, a common, or just any kind of oppression of other humans, one of the very common phrases people use is that, such and such group or an individual person was treated like an animal or were treated like animals. And to me, that tells you everything you need to know about how humans feel it's okay to treat animals.
Yeah. Because the more subtle version of that, but I think it's very true as well, there is dehumanized.
Yeah.
Because it's okay, but if they're not human, then what are they?
Right.
It's animals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like the phrase dehumanized is a useful one, and the Black Sabbath album Dehumanizer is actually a very underrated album, but it carries a little bit of speciesism. And, there is a thing where it's like, okay, people get very angry. A lot of people get very angry, like, when you compare, horrors done to other humans with horrors done to non-human animals, right? And, like, I understand that. But, like, whenever I do that, it's not because I think that the horrors done to humans were less horrible than someone else thinks they are. It's just that I think that the horrors done to animals also rise to that level.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like people being like, oh, what was worse? Like, slavery or the Holocaust? Like, no, that's not a thing, right? They're both maximum awfulness, and there's no need to, like, compare.
Yeah, and I think that's important because I think there's sometimes the perception that, as a professional fundraiser, to me, one of the hardest things is that every time I write a grant or I'm asking people for money, I always sort of feel like I'm saying, like, don't give money to that cause, give money to my cause instead.
Right.
And I think that the nonprofit capitalist industrial complex, like, pushes that narrative, but I think it's important to understand that most of us are not engaging in that, and that includes vegan. The extremists from PETA, I think, often get bad attention, but every nonprofit cause I know has extremists. And I think for the most part, I very rarely hear a vegan being like, wait, don't give money to Black Lives Matter, give money to help stop this, animal experimentation. Like, they're all like, all this oppression is wrong,
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that I would throw on top of that is, like, as someone advocating on behalf of animals, like, I understand animals can't really advocate on behalf of themselves within human society. Like, yes, there's the cow, I think her name was Bessie, that just escaped, like, and, like, she was a hero. There's a picture of her at the Candle Cafe, like, my favorite vegan restaurant back in the day. They just reopened a new one. But, like, on the whole, like, you're not going to see a bunch of cows, like, marching down to Congress or anything, right? Yeah. Whereas with human causes, it's like, there's always going to be someone who's trying to stick up for themselves. And I'm going to be like, yes, I have your back, Yeah. And I'm going to try and talk about it and help more people understand what the person is saying in self-advocacy. Right. But like with animals, it's just, it has to be a little different. The same way, like, if you were advocating for, like, 2-year-olds, right? Yeah. You would, it's just a little different.
Yeah. No, I hear that. So the other thing that the movie did that really kind of struck me, and this one I know we've talked about before, but I want to use this as a chance to get back into it, is, again, with this idea of, like, okay, but, like, the cuddly, cute animals, those are the ones we care about.
Right.
And there were two ways the movie addressed this. The first is that there's a scene towards the end of the movie, some spoilers here, where they get attacked by these just, like, huge... They look very monstrous and scary to human eyes. Mm-hmm. They look a lot like kind of the rolling balls of teeth from The Force Awakens, if you remember that movie. Yeah. They've got tentacles and teeth, and they're roaring and chomping. Yeah. And they're getting ready to attack, and our heroes are getting ready to attack. And then Mantis, who's kind of the empath one of them, sort of steps up. Yeah. It's like, wait a minute. And she kind of, like, figures out these animals are just afraid. Yeah. And they're trying to be scary because they're afraid, and that's what is their instinctual reaction to do. And on the surface level, there's a, like, don't always be scared of the scary looking animal, but it actually goes a lot deeper to, wait a minute, a lot of the times that, like, an animal is attacking us, like, there's a difference between, like, you're in a wolf's territory and the wolf's trying to attack you because you're in its territory versus, like, the Imperial Guard is trying to shoot you because, you're trying to fight the Empire. Like, both of them may pose a lethal threat, and you may need to act accordingly. But in one of those cases, it's a, like, that human should be choosing otherwise. In other cases, like, no, this isn't just an animal doing what it's doing, and maybe you're the idiot for, like, putting yourself in that position, or maybe you can, like, recognize its fear and back away, which is exactly what winds up happening. And she kind of is able to connect with the animals and be like, no, they're just afraid. And if we can show them that we're not a threat, they're not going to be scary to us.
Yeah. And I mean, that often is very effective in, in real life. Like, especially with like if you see a dog who's, like, growling at you, you don't, like, if you're aggressive towards them, they're going to continue to be aggressive, right? But often there are ways of diffusing things. But yeah, I mean, one of the most effective ways to get attacked by animals is to, basically tread on their, home area,
Animals have castle defense.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, there's the sort of, I don't know if it's a trope or whatever, but of, like, the mother animal, like, defending its young or whatever, or her young. Which, to circle back to pronouns, like, I do it as like a unconscious thing, but like calling animals like it and its is like a very interesting dehumanizing or,
right.
you know, depersonizing, to the point where I've actually contemplating using its pronouns myself to just be like, deal with it, you know, also because like at some point robots are going to get called it and its and like will probably be sentient. And it's like, well, I
will say, like, you know, in the neo-pronoun world, like, a lot of non-binary folks I know use they, them, but I definitely have met folks who use it, its, and the two who I can most easily think of both were vegans, and both that was one of the points they made as to why they did it. So.
Interesting, yeah.
So and it's funny actually because forgive me for calling back to a part of something you generally have enjoyed, but that we both really did not like. To me, this is something that Star Wars has gotten this exact same question both very right and very wrong, which is so striking to me. In that, in Mandalorian Season 2, there's this whole episode, basically, where they go to a planet where ice spiders happen to live. And the movie is portrayed, like, the show shows them as, like, these big, scary monsters that are going to kill our poor, helpless characters. And then we're supposed to kind of cheer as the ice spiders are just slaughtered en masse. Whereas, like, they're just defending their home that these people have come and invaded. Yeah. And I didn't like it at the time. You especially helped point out what was problematic about it. And then I rewatched Rebels. And there's a whole sort of plot line in Rebels about how big, giant spiders that look terrifying are not actually scary if you're not scared of them. And I was it just kind of made me, like, laugh. Like, okay, Filoni, you're really good for the most part at, like, referencing your own stuff. But here's an issue that you previously got right, and now you're getting wrong.
Right, because, well, did Filoni write that episode of, well, so in Rebels, actually, they kind of have both sides of it, because there is the whole, like, earlier on, there's an episode that really bothered me in season 1 where, you know, basically Hera and Sabine, I think, go to meet up with Fulcrum. And I won't get too into the details, but like basically there's a bunch of scary looking animals and they kill a bunch of them, you know, and then later, like, you know, they communicate with them, but it's a different they, right? I mean, it's like, it's Ezra and Kanan, but like, so I feel like Filoni kind of, and I think this maybe gets to another point where I feel like some writers and certainly a lot of people, I think, kind of selectively, you know, can take that and use it as a story, but then not have like fully internalize like the idea, you know, because like I feel like it seemed like a good story to Filoni, you know, but I mean, I don't know that much about Dave, but just not enough.
I'm kind of acting as though he has final script approval over everything that's ever been done in the last 20 years of Star Wars.
Which is
it's not that case, but just to kind of
but I get it, and to me, it's like there's so here in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, right? You've got a bunch of stuff about experimenting on animals, right? Which is I don't know whether it's for science or whether it's for personal gain or what. And you can address that or not. But like, to me, it's like, I think it's going to, I wonder whether it will be easy for someone to see this movie and think, oh, well, experimenting on animals is horrible. We've got to stop that. We must, we'll do something about that. But like, you know, eating them is fine, you know, or keeping them in cages for you know, for dairy and whatever. And I mean, that's the sort of thing where like, if I were writing the movie and like this might be the sort of thing where it would be a challenge to kind of bring it back around. But like, I would probably have like Star-Lord going to Earth and like trying to order a burger and be like, I just can't do it, you know?
Yeah. And I will say that is one, like, there's a kind of larger issue here also in terms of like movies that like, you know, we're at like level 5. It sounds a little patronizing, but like,
let's do it. Let's patronize.
Yeah, but like we're like, there's a particular issue that you have done like numerous levels of analysis on and gotten into numerous levels of nuance. And there's a movie or a TV show that's introducing the basic concepts to people. You know, and where you're like, okay, well, I could get really critical about how they're still not getting it right, but at least they're starting the conversation. There is a running thing in the movie that I really didn't like that felt very clearly like the movie is saying, we want you to feel bad about the way animals are treated, but we're not saying you have to be a vegetarian. Mm-hmm. Which is that people are walking around eating, like... First of all, I rewatched the first Guardians movie and forgot that it opens up with Star-Lord just, like, kicking these little rats all over.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and, like, picking them up and singing into them. Basically, like, the delicacy on the planet that they're now on most of the time is, like, those rats on a stick that someone has roasted. Right. And, like, numerous characters are shown eating them, I think including Rocket at one point. Right. And that is never questioned in the slightest. And that felt to me like either A, it was just a glaring oversight, B, more likely it was an intentional way of the movie being like, yeah, we're going to push the animal rights thing, but don't worry, you should still go have a hamburger after this and not feel bad.
Yeah, and that, you know, that to me, I'm sure would bother me a lot, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
it bothered me, and I still eat meat,
There's stuff in live action Star Wars where there's similarly there's something with like those, you know, that annoying little loud dude who's like hanging out with Jabba. There's like them on a stick or something, and like I don't like that. You know, I think I don't know if it's on Tatooine or what, but like that to me that's like an opportunity, you know, where it wouldn't even have to be like a big thing, right? That's like that could be like a 15-second beat. Yeah. Where it's like after going and doing all of what they've done, like coming back and being like, oh yeah, huh. You know, and it's like you don't even have to have them be like, oh, I am now never going to eat. Just like posing the question even, you know, and like drawing the connection. To me, I do believe in like better than nothing, you know. Yeah. Like I think, getting people to start to question things is better than not doing that, right? You don't always have to connect all the dots for everybody, but like, you know, I do think it would be nice to like put a little bit more like than what it sounds like. It sounds like that issue definitely went completely unaddressed. And
there's two funny things I'll say about it. One is that maybe not funny but sad. I think you're right. I would have liked it if they had done just a little thing on that. I think if they had, the number of people who felt like, or who would claim that this was now an example of a movie that was just making a point at the expense of good storytelling would go up significantly. Because I don't know. I'm not saying that's a reason not to do it. Like, I think it's a hard calculus to do, but I'm guessing that level of challenging people would have, and maybe to me that's a good reason to do it, but like, I do think that would be the thing that would push a lot of people to be like, whoa. Like, I'm comfortable feeling like this guy who tortures animals is bad, but no, like, you know, just let me eat my burger in peace.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, obviously we don't know and won't know, but I feel like, to me, it's like, so first of all, obviously there's already a fair number of people who are saying that, and you know, the outrage machine is still working, right? Well,
and to the flip side on that, one of the biggest, not one of the biggest, but one of the forms of outrage that I've seen is that apparently a lot of kids are going to this movie and then being like, Mommy, Daddy, I don't want to eat animals anymore.
That's fantastic.
And parents are annoyed that their kids are vegetarians. So like, even if it had that, some kids are getting the right message there.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I mean, parents, you gotta understand your kids have agency, and there's a reasonable chance they have better ideas than you do. But, you know, and that's why I think like a 15-second kind of almost throwaway, like you could blink and you could miss it, but it's there, would be the way that I would want to try and address something like that. Because I think if you had a big 5-10 minute bonus plot arc or whatever that's really hitting people over the head with it, I don't see that being as effective, you know? Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a different story or whatever, right? But like, I think I think often there's room to do subtle things, you know, that can sort of satisfy a point that I want to see without, I'll put it this way. I think you could try and write a scene like that and like potentially ruin the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and kind of undermine your point by being just way too on the nose and just, it could just not work. Right.
Yeah.
But I also think, like, when you told me that's a thing, to me, that feels like, oh, that's a way better way of doing it than like having some like Star-Lord on Earth and cheeseburgers. You know?
Yeah, all you needed would be Rocket, like a bunch of them going up to buy more of those like rats on sticks, and Rocket being, yeah, no, actually I'll pass, or something like that. You know,
or like, not today. You know, it's like, it doesn't even have to be like a character being like, I am now a vegetarian. Like, sure, that's great. Like, I'd like to see more vegetarians represented in fiction, but like, even just to like, you know, right now, I'm not gonna like that. To me is enough to just like put just a little idea. Yeah, you know, just like,
I think it's a good way of putting it. There's one last thing that the movie did that I get, and that's kind of on a similar note, but a little bit different from what we were just saying, but it's on that same, like, recognizing that a creature looking scary to us doesn't mean that it has less moral value, or less moral worth. And it's where our heroes are all trying to find all of the animals that are of all kinds and rescue them. And Mantis is going through and, you know, to the different cages, and many of them are human animals, many of them are clearly not. They're animals from just other planets. And she goes into one cage of an animal that is just, you know, I think designed to the words that come to mind when I look at it are ugly and scary. Right. It's got, like, you know, a lot of big teeth, and it looks weird and misshapen, and it just is like, ah! And she has that initial reaction. Mm-hmm. And then immediately she says to the animal, Oh, no. I saw something scary behind you. I don't think you're scary. You're beautiful. Come, let me help you. Mm-hmm. And it was such a, like, not only does she acknowledge that her fear reaction to this animal is not unjustified, but that it's wrong. You know, that there's nothing inherently scary or wrong about this animal. Right. And that it's just as deserving of being rescued as all the others. But that she also, like, and this animal doesn't speak to her. This animal doesn't, as you were just saying, doesn't express any emotional reaction to her reaction. Yeah. But she still feels no, I need to reassure this animal that I wasn't scared about it. Right. And I was just like, that again is a moment of, yes, you're not going to 501, but you're also, like, you understand that at 101 there's some things you're still missing, and you're going a little further than that. And I appreciate that. That was maybe, in terms of, like, the portrayal of animals, portrayal, not betrayal, was maybe my favorite moment of just, like, the thoughtfulness that went into that one scene.
Yeah, that sounds really nice. I think, like, it's like, you don't have to feel bad about having, like, biased thoughts, right? Yeah. Like, you don't have to feel bad about having thoughts and sometimes desires of doing things that cause harm. Like, your thoughts are your thoughts, right? Your feelings are your feelings. But, like, being able to recognize those thoughts and feelings and then still take an action that is not harmful, but that tries to undo or ameliorate or whatever harm you may have done or may potentially do. To me, that's, like, more powerful and impressive than, like, like, for me, being a vegan is, like, pretty easy. Like, I never really liked meat. I gradually stopped having dairy and eggs. Like, now in the 21st century, there's too many vegan restaurants that, like, I've managed to gain a lot of weight. You know, like, when I was younger, I was super thin, and, like, that was kind of just my build. But also it was just easy because, like, there just wasn't a lot, like, there wasn't good vegan ice cream.
I remember how mad you were when good vegan ice cream started hitting. I think
I was like, oh no, this is a disaster, you know? And it was fine when I was, like, exercising 40 hours a week, you know? But when you stop doing that, you know, you can't have as many pints of this stuff. And so, you know, I think I have empathy for people who are like, no, but I really do like the taste. And it's like, okay, I understand. I get that. I don't get that on a personal, I can relate directly, but, like, I really like vegan ice cream and I don't want to eat it, you know, but so much. But
I mean, there I can jump in. As I said, I do still eat meat. I'm trying to reduce the amount of meat I eat constantly, and I now try to eat as much meat as I can that only comes from ethically sourced, where the animals are treated much better. but they are still being killed so I can eat them. And I think that's something that a lot of people are still going to find ethically objectionable. And as more time goes on, I may change that entirely. And if folks judge me for that is completely fair. But I'll say one kind of meat that I used to really enjoy because I thought it was the best chicken sandwich that I'd ever had was Chick-fil-A. And once I came to understand what they were doing with the money and how harmful it was to people like me, or even if I wasn't a person like that, but especially that, I was like, no, I haven't had a Chick-fil-A sandwich in like 5 years, 7 years. And when I hear someone say, everyone should give it up, it's not even any good, my reaction is always like, that's bad propaganda. Because what you're saying is, what I would hear if I was still eating them is, when you say I shouldn't eat them, you don't understand that I am giving up something.
Right.
You know? And this is all kind of a tangent, but I think that's an important thing. I think it is completely valid for someone who's just like, yeah, like I don't enjoy it anymore, and I'm just enjoying this other stuff, and that's great. But also recognize that's very different than the person who's like, no, for me, I know also, and this sounds like justification. It's not. It's just more part of the thinking. Like a lot of it's also tied into like, food is my self-medication, so I don't drink or do drugs. And like that's a thing I also work on as well. But it's that we all have everybody has such very psychologically, socially, economically complicated relationships to food. For myself, at least, what I'm much more interested in is helping people understand how to make healthier choices, better choices, more ethical choices, and figure that out along the way.
Yeah, and
that was all a very long tangent, and I apologize.
Sure. I have never had Chick-fil-A. I'll say that, but that is very easy for me. I feel like it. Like, I would like to see a world where just people didn't eat animals anymore or animal products. If I live that long, that would be fantastic. I'd be super happy about that. Someone's going to have to invent some anti-aging stuff because I think it's going to take a long time. I do think that's a reasonable future, honestly. Especially in terms of sustainability and whatnot. But, when it's like maybe 1% of the population is vegan, maybe I think less than 5% of the United States is vegetarian even. It was 3% for a long time. If you ask me, like, would you rather double the percent of the population that was vegan or have everybody who eats meat cut their meat intake in half? It's like, of course, it's the second one. Yeah. Right. It's like, I'd like to have more people that I fully agree with, but like, ultimately, to me, it's about, how much harm is being done, how much suffering there is. And, if you can cut that in half, not by, through an infinity gauntlet or something, but, but like, and so that's, to me, it's like, I'm a very all or nothing person, right? I'm either going to do a thing and I'm going to do it a lot, or I'm not going to do it at all. And for better and for worse, right? Like that's sort of where Zen Madman came from as like a moniker, right? Like, but I understand that's not everybody. And that certainly isn't going to work for anybody or even maybe most people. And so I think, if you feel like if you feel conflicted, I think it's important to understand you don't necessarily have to, make whatever change you want to make all at once. If you do and you can, that's great. I'm in support of that, but if meatless Mondays is like the best you can do, like that's better than not meatless Mondays. You know what I mean? So,
and I'll say in terms of like thinking about that time where we're just stopping to meat, to me, put aside all the other factors. Right now, when I walk into a store, a regular pound of meat might be a certain price. The stuff that I like, where it's ethically and locally raised, and it's more environmentally sustainable, and the animals are treated much better, is probably going to be $1 to $2 more a pound. And the Impossible Burger stuff, the lab-grown meat, is going to be another $1 or $2 more a pound. And that's often, I think, right now one of those is subsidized and the rest aren't, and that's
right. Yeah,
often a whole set of topics. But
that's a whole thing. And there is literal lab-grown meat. Like, that's actually a thing now, which isn't what the Impossible is, right? The Impossible is something else. But
I thought Impossible Burger was that, but you might be right.
It? You know what? They didn't make it for me. I'm like, this tastes gross.
Yeah, because it is made for the person who wants to replicate the meat experience.
Right. Exactly. I'm like, could it taste more like tofu?
Yeah.
No, that's not generally what I mean. I want tofu to taste like tofu, but like, yeah, the really meaty taste things. I'm like, I'm not your target audience. That's fine. I'm glad it exists like this movie, but I'm not really the target audience, and that's fine.
All right. Well, anything else you want to say on this? Because there's one other piece of feedback, and it's a bit of a doozy that I want us to. I think there's like 2 or 3, not as long as this, but kind of 2 or 3 sub issues it's going to raise. But any other last things you want to say about this topic?
No, I feel like I just gave my, impassioned plea to like, eat fewer animals if you can't eat no animals. And, that's, I'll close on that. Like, it sounds like this movie does a good thing. It sounds like it does at least a reasonable job of it. Like anything, I'm sure it could do that better. I didn't actually see it, so I'm not commenting on how it's actually, executed. And, I don't speak for animals, but I try to speak in defense of them when I can.
No, I think it's fair. And just, I can't let this go without making one general review comment about the movie. The movie was a lot better than I expected it to be. I think it was a very good 90-minute long rocket biopic backstory origin movie wrapped in a 2-hour and 30-minute Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I just thought there was, especially because you get a lot of scenes of the Guardians without Rocket. I'm like, why would I watch this? Like, he's the most interesting character. Yeah. But they by the end, if you ever do watch it, just in terms of like a movie trilogy, they wrap up a lot of the stories in really interesting ways. And in a different context, they do a lot of stuff with relationships that I thought is ethically really interesting. Particularly the fact that Peter Quill, whose feelings towards women have, I think, raised a lot of eyebrows, my own very much included. And they don't have him get back together with that's a big spoiler there, sorry, but we said spoiler warnings.
Gamora is the name.
Yeah. I was thinking if I should cut that out. No, I'm going to keep it in. We said spoiler warnings, but yeah, it's a that I'll talk about in a different topic. But I was very happy with how they did that. I thought they did a lot of other really good things. They're just very, emotionally aware. And then have a mid-credit scene that apparently, if you look closely, doesn't look like what it looks like. But it looks like the new version of the Guardians of the Galaxy are like helping all the people who've been rescued be settlers, and they're just going out to slaughter a bunch of wild animals that are attacking the settlers. And I was like, but apparently, like, it's a little too blink and you miss it, but they're all supposed to look like cybernetically advanced, like they're robotic or something. Like, yeah. But it was just like, what? Did you not just watch the movie we just watched?
Oh dear.
But anyway, a lot of great stuff there. So thank you so much, Sophia. That was a great piece of feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
And then there's another piece of feedback we got, and I'll admit, I have been quite bad about following up on feedback. I'm going to try and catch up on it, and then this summer in general has been really rough, but by the end of this summer, my hope is that we're going to be much better about getting you all the right feedback at the right times and things like that. This feedback comes from some time ago, but partially it's because I spent a long time wondering, like, how do I want to talk about this and whether Paul should be a part of the conversation or not. And then Paul, of course, was not a regular guest anymore. And so I talked about it with Paul, and I think this is the right time to talk about it. And it's an email that raises a couple of different related but different topics, since we're going to kind of go through them one by one. And again, Paul read this email as well and was okay with it being read. And it's from Sean McNeil. And he says, "First, I want to say thank you for doing the Superhero Ethics podcast. Both you and Paul challenge me regularly to think differently than I normally would. As I get older and my boy grows, I find the idea of sharing thoughts and opinions with others unlike myself more and more important. I don't like Paul at all, meaning I know we wouldn't get along in a social setting. Just way too different, probably to the point where we would purposely avoid each other out of respect for not ruining the night arguing about something dumb. As for you and I am the I, these are Matthew, I could go on forever about my thoughts on organized religion, I had terrible experiences, but your honesty feels real, and I feel like we could spend hours challenging the way each other views and interacts with the world. So the point I would like to challenge. So the point I would like to challenge: the entire idea of great power comes great responsibility altogether. And this is some time ago. We did an episode about that Uncle Ben Spider-Man idea of great power comes great responsibility, and is that actually too much pressure to put on heroes, etc. And he continues, I found that the majority of the discussion focused on the idea that this was generally a good thing, or that if you have power, no matter how you feel at the start, you will revel in the responsibility at the end. I think it's all garbage. Who is anyone to put that responsibility on any being, super or not? Who decided Superman is responsible for saving the world? The people? I'm a person. I have no right to tell Superman he must save me. The government? Haha. It'd be pretty narcissistic for them to give themselves the responsibility, right? Take it out of superhero world. I am a fairly privileged white male. I have the power to stop some sort of injustice just by being a white male. Narcissistic of me to say. In some way every day. Is it my responsibility to seek it out because I have the power? In America, we have pursuit of happiness, where as long as I'm not infringing on anyone else's happiness, I can pursue mine. We as a society put on Superman to protect us all, at all times. Does he get to pursue his happiness? It may make him happy to save me today, may make him happier to spend time with Lois instead of stopping my car crash. With great power comes great power. No one has the right to tell me what I must do with it. As long as I'm pursuing my happiness, not getting in the way of anyone else's, just wearing my mask in the grocery, and walking out as someone who refuses to wear one screams at an employee. Just because I have the power to step in doesn't mean I have the responsibility to. Please don't ever stop making me think, Sean McNeil. So, as you can tell, there's a couple of things in here, and we are going to get to the main point Sean references, but I think, Paul, the stuff you said about you, I want to let you respond to it in general, but as you and I were talking about it, I think it opens up some larger questions also about parasocial relationships and feedback and things like that. But let me just start by, Paul, letting you kind of respond to it.
Yeah, so I guess thanks for the compliment in terms of, I think, challenging people to think about things in different ways is pretty much the main reason that I like being on this podcast, aside from the fact that I would just want to like hang out and chat with Matthew anyway. Yeah. But in terms of like the sort of the good that we do or that like what I would hope, would be the benefit is, for me, it's not about telling someone this is my opinion and like it is right. I mean, obviously I think it's right or I would change my opinion, but it's about saying this is my opinion. This is my point of view. Thanks for listening to it. And if it sways you, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. Right. And so I think like the like, you don't like me, like you don't know me, you know me on a podcast, you know how I talk about certain things. I do not spend most of my time talking about these things. I mean, sometimes I end up spending more time than I would like talking about them, outside of podcasting. And specifically, I've been doing superhero ethics a little less because I do find like there's kind of only a certain amount of juice kind of I have in terms of like dealing with all the awful things in the world or the things that I have issues with. And like, honestly, when I'm hanging out, like, I don't want to talk about all that all the time, Yeah. And so in terms of not getting along, I have no idea whether we would get along or not, except that like, I get along with like just about everybody. And from like days of playing poker, like, I have right-wing friends. I have libertarian friends. I have left-wing friends, liberal friends, like, neo-liberal, neo-conservative. Like, I don't care. Like, I will be friends with anybody within the context of, doing an activity, sitting around playing poker. That's pretty much the activity I do these days. But like, the exception would be like, if you bring something up, I might object. Sometimes I'll just let something go. But if like something seems like really way out of line, but, I'm not like, oh, we have to argue about everything all the time. Like on this podcast, we're here to discuss stuff like this, right? So that's all I'm doing. But outside of this podcast, And I think more generally, like when you see anybody in any type of media, I think, it's probably best to avoid making too many assumptions about what that person's like outside of that context, because context has a lot to do with like what we're going to say and what we're going to talk about.
No, I think I'm really glad you said that. And I want to say more about the parasocialness, but I think also it's worth saying, like, there's a lot of assumptions made about you there, but also about me, because I am not as good as you are. I am. I also have enough experience with some of those folks from poker and the like that I can be friendly, but I would not have as wide a range of friends. I definitely do not have as wide an intellectual range of friends as Paul does. And I have family members who I have cut out of my life because they believe things that I think are really harmful to me and to others like me and to people I care about. If you find me on places like Facebook or TikTok, I tend to be a lot more virulent about some of this stuff. I'm never silencing myself on these topics, but I think I am I think also just the roles that you and I play, that I am the host, I'm the one who's trying to drive the conversation, you're the guest. It puts you in a position often where you're more likely to be the one taking a more strident position. But like, if you and I are playing at a poker table and someone sits down with a MAGA hat on, I'm probably much more likely to cause an issue than you are.
Yeah.
I
haven't seen one of those in a long time. Anyway.
Yeah. I also just think, and here's the thing about feedback, and because I've been thinking a lot about parasocial relationships, and for anyone who doesn't know that, a parasocial relationship is a relationship where, like, right now, because of social media, it's very easy to feel like you have a very intense, personal, intimate, like, connection with people where what they're sending to you feels like something a friend would send you, but they're sending it to 1,000 people or 1 million people. There's a whole thing happening right now in the Taylor Swift fandom about who she's dating that is a very complex, nuanced issue, and I'm not trying to get into it, but it's raising a lot of questions for people about how do parasocial relationships work and what is or is not okay. And again, that's a whole complex situation. I'm not making a comment on one or the other. But I do think it's important to be... I have had to learn to be very careful about... like, for a while, I definitely had a parasocial relationship with Matt and Jeff, the hosts of the MCU cast. I happened to get to know them individually and found they're quite different than the people who they are on their podcast in some ways, not in others. And similarly with other guests of mine and with me. And I think it's just, as I love feedback, I love that interaction, but I just want to ask people to be a bit careful. Like, Paul, you handled it quite well. But I just want to say, kind of like, if you don't like one of us personally, like, that's fine. I don't think there's any need to let us know. Or if it is, just doing it wrapped up in an email where you're also asking for legitimate feedback. I'm happy to still wind up giving you that feedback. But it felt pretty inappropriate to me. I think there's a better way to have phrased it, even if what you're trying to say is that, like, one of us you think you could have gotten along with better than the other. And again, I don't know what the right or the wrong thing is, and I'm not saying to other people, like, I don't want people who are thinking about writing into this podcast to feel like they have to censor themselves, but just I think it's a good reminder of, like, you know me and you know my other guests through what the part of ourselves we put out. And just to remember that that's it's not that I think anyone is being fake on here, it's that I think all of us have personas. All of us are the people we are at work and the people we are with our partners and the people we are with our friends. And those are different aspects of ourselves. And a lot of psychological health is how integrated or non-integrated those are. But if you see only one of those, you're only seeing one of those.
Yeah. And to add to that or kind of expand a little, like, that doesn't mean any of it's an act. It's just, what you do in one context isn't necessarily the same thing that, or what I do in one context, what one does in a given context, isn't always going to be the same thing that a person's going to do in another context.
Right.
And there are a lot of contexts in, like, one podcast or one, YouTube channel or whatever isn't going to be, isn't going to give a full view of, someone's life, basically.
Right. Yeah. I think, like, to me, when you spot outright hypocrisies, like with news coming out about Fox News hosts who, believe very different things than what they were saying, or like when you see, like, with I don't know enough about the specific Taylor Swift situation to comment on it directly, but I know that there are people who feel like the choices she is making in her romantic life do go directly against the ideals that she talks about when she speaks on stage and she sings on stage and things like that. And so they see a hypocrisy there. I again, I'm not commenting on it, but I'm saying I think okay, that might be a place where it's worth commenting on that. But I think, and certainly I want to open that door. If you think that's happening with me, please go ahead and do so. I think certainly sometimes I don't live up to my own ideals, and I think that's worthwhile discussing. But just, I think it's easy to forget that there are real people you're talking to, and just kind of treat that appropriately. So let's get into the main meat of this idea. That's a very poor phrase, given what else we've been talking about today. Let's get into the tofu of this, the chickpeas of it. How do you feel about this? Because I have some thoughts, but I'm curious where you would start.
Right. So the first question, I'm just going to answer directly. Who decided Superman is responsible for saving the world? And there's a very clear answer to this, and the answer is Superman. Yeah. Right? He decided to be Superman. Now, you could say, okay, Jor-El kind of pushed him in that direction, right? Mm-hmm. Literally sent him in that direction in a spaceship when he was an infant. And you could say that, the Kents kind of helped him become who he was and where he wanted to do that. But there's agency there, right? Superman decided that he wanted to be Superman, that he didn't want to just be Clark Kent, right? He's both, but he decided, right? Yeah. And could the government tell him that he has to do all these things? No, I don't think that would be reasonable. I think he can make an agreement. Hey, I'm going to defend Earth. So, and make sure that there's, no military struggle so you can get rid of all the nukes or whatever. Like that's the plot of one, the beginning of the Justice League. Animated series, right? So I think he can enter into an agreement to do such and such. But if he wants to go on a date with Lois Lane, he can go on a date with Lois Lane. If he wants to save you from a car wreck, he can save you from a car wreck. Now, if you actually had all of the abilities of Superman, like that does sound quite overwhelming. If you're trying, every time you're not saving someone's probably dying because you're not saving them. But also, if you didn't exist, they would have been dying anyway. So, in terms of what responsibility a person has to act, like, I don't really believe the whole great power comes great responsibility. And I think that was kind of the takeaway from the podcast. But that doesn't mean, with great power comes great power, right? Power is power. And it's up to you what you do with it. And there can be coercive forces that try and get you to do something. But like, to me, it's just like, if you can do something about it, like, why wouldn't you? Right. And that's your choice.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to talk about it, because I to me, in some ways, the great power, great responsibility question is far too binary for me. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's where, like, on the surface, Sean, I'm agreeing with you, but I also fundamentally disagree with a lot of what you say. And I think yes, I think that idea that you have to do so becomes really problematic. And it's a fundamental lack of agency and can become literal slavery at that point. And I can say I'm not Superman by any means, but as someone who worked in the nonprofit industry for most of my career, this is a very real issue. And when I was getting started in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a definite, ethos of, wait, you're going to a movie when you could be doing one more social justice action? Wait, you're, spending money on this thing for yourself when you could be donating it to a cause? Like, that's selfish. There was almost a kind of machismo of who's the most dedicated to helping others. And also no one in the industry who'd been working there for more than 5 years.
Right.
Because we were all burning out, because that's simply not sustainable. And so I think, here's how I kind of square the circle. For me, it has to be, in the end, a question of personal agency. I think people need to decide for themselves, choose their battles. What are the causes they're going to donate to? What are the things that they're going to spend their time working on? What are the things they're going to not? And yes, I do think that trying to fix every single situation that you could is going to wind up being incredibly deleterious to your health, probably. But I also think there's nothing wrong with other people encouraging people to help when they can. And here's where it comes down to me, and here's kind of it's the flip side of that responsibility. Responsibility implies coercion. To me, it's not that I want people to be coerced to do good things. It's that I am a person who feels like I should do good things, and that affects my personal decision-making. And if you're not, I'm not going to want someone to force you to. I just might think you're kind of a jackass. And here's where I do think that there is that level of responsibility understood in a very different way. Because, and here's, I think, Sean, where I would most disagree with you. And this is something, Paul, you and I might disagree on as well. But, like, you talk about how kind of you're a white male and that you have that power, but is that your responsibility? And to me, I think the thing that you're missing, that I think a lot of people miss in these conversations, is that someone being a white male and thus having the power to help, and other people not being white male, or whatever the position of power is, and thus being in a bad situation that they could use help, those things are not disconnected. They're often very connected. And often the amount of power or privilege is a word that I think has gotten very overused and misunderstood, but whatever word you want to use is directly related to the people who don't have that, who are having problems that you might be able to fix. And I'll give a very personal example for me. I am white. I'm not male, but I'm male presenting. I get a lot of male privilege. But I'll talk about specifically the fact that I'm Christian. And as a Christian, I get an awful lot of good things in this world that a lot of people don't get. No one questions when I want to take my holidays off. No one thinks that when I mention my holidays or that I'm doing something for them, it's weird. I get to participate in the Uber culture in the way an awful lot of people don't. And I don't spend my time having the Uber culture remind me that I don't fit in the way someone who isn't Christian, but, hears Christmas music for 1/12 of the year, if not more, does all the time. So, and I don't feel bad about being a Christian. It is something I choose and it's something I believe in, even though I greatly disagree with a lot of the people who claim to be Christians and do what I see as terrible things in that name. The ethical causes that I tend to focus on most are things like reproductive justice, queer rights, trans rights. And that's in large part because it is people like me who are often the loudest and doing the most to take away those rights from people. It is often people in the name of Christ attacking, abortion rights or attacking queer people or attacking trans people. And so for me, I see a direct correlation between if I go into a room and say, as a Christian, I think this is wrong, there's an awful lot of people who will listen to me in the way they wouldn't if someone said as an atheist or as a Jew or as a Muslim or whatever.
Yeah, they just call me a godless heathen.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if I can quote the Bible at them, they're going to pay more attention. So the nature of my being Christian gives me that power. And there are people who are directly hurt by Christians. And so, yeah, I do feel like those two things are intrinsically linked. In the same way that, I benefit an awful lot by the fact that people like me took over this country. And so I do feel there's a native restaurant in our town, Owambi. I think I'm pronouncing it right, Owamji, perhaps. They only serve ingredients that grew here before Columbus came, and they employ all indigenous folks and do an awful lot to support indigenous businesses and things like that. I go out of my way to try to support that business because I feel like, I am the beneficiary of all the things that were done to do horrible things to indigenous people. Do I think that means every white person has to do that or that there should be a law compelling it? No. I do think we should have laws set up to address injustices, but to me, that's not about helping. That's about making a society function. I think that's a fairly different question. But, and I promise I'll get to the end of this rant and let Paul jump in. But for me, I think that's where it kind of comes down to, is that I don't I think responsibility is the locus of responsibility is your own internal discussion about when and where you're going to get involved. And I think other people can contribute to that the way they can contribute, like every person decides what level of, are they going to lie to other people? But other people can be like, hey, lying is bad, and you can make your decisions about it. So I don't want to live in a world where people are compelled to act upon the power they have to do good. But yeah, I'm probably going to judge you based on it. And with some understanding of, I don't know your circumstances and all that, but all nuances aside. All right, rant over, go.
Yeah, so I think you make a really good point about the difference kind of between, I guess, relativistic power that comes at the expense of others, right? Mm-hmm. There's power you can have because other people don't have power. And I think that's largely a social phenomenon, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's like Superman's power doesn't make other people less powerful. I mean, I guess by comparison, they're less powerful, right? Like the military is less powerful because there's Superman, right? Just in terms of by comparison, but he's not actually taking power or resources away from anybody else. And in terms of things like privilege, which again is a word that I've had thoughts about, but I think if we're just going to kind of use it hand wavy, like there are resources, this planet has limited resources, right? And social power is a thing, and often one person having more of it means someone else has less of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. I think there are other ways that society could be constructed and that people could live with one another and with the other inhabitants of the planet. Things don't have to be a zero-sum game, but in many ways things are a zero-sum game, right? Like they don't have to be, but that's how some things do function. And when they do, then when your power comes at the expense of someone else's, not because you've taken it, but because you've been given it, I do think there is something to be said for like, maybe you should give some of that back, right? Yeah. To make things equal, as opposed to like, which is completely different from like being born with exceptional intellect or strength or whatever, where it's like that doesn't come at anyone else's expense. That's just a natural characteristic of you. And do what you will with that. To me, I think to kind of summarize what I was saying in the first place, and I think a lot of the gist of what you were saying, Matthew, at the end of it, it's like, it's your choice, but I may disagree with your choice.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, in many ways, to me, it's just about compassion. It's about, like, to me, that's what the movie was trying to get at more than anything, is it's trying to be like, I think so much of the ways people choose not to act, and by the way, I do like Martin Luther King in particular had a lot of great things to say about this, but I do hold to some idea, the idea of, like, choosing to do nothing is a vote in support of the status quo. Like, and that's, not that like that I think idea can be taken to an extreme, but like there's something to be said for like when you are in a system of injustice, it is not necessarily your duty to rescue everyone from injustice, but you're participating in that system, and so to some extent you're giving more power to that system without challenging it. But to me, what like a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy does is to say people participate in systems that do terrible things to animals far out of their sight. And we want you to have to look at it. We want you to have to look at what goes into the shampoo that you buy that was tested on animals. We want you to have to look into, all these kind of things. And I think often that's what a lot of the, good movies that help to make a point are about, is about helping people to see that who are the people who are suffering, and is this something you can have more compassion for than you thought, in a telling us when someone has just like, oh, all immigrants are this, all gays are this or whatever, telling a story about that person in a way that draws empathy and compassion should, I hope, make it harder for someone to participate in a system that does harm to those people. Not always, but often. And I do think that's a part of how I probably judge a person. And I think that's also what I would look at this, is I would say, if every time you walk into a store, Sean just gives this one example, and Sean, again, I'm not calling you out in particular, I'm just using the examples you talk to. I have been in stores where someone yelled at the person for saying they have to wear a mask, and I said something. I've been in stores where I didn't. And sometimes because I didn't feel safe in the situation, other times it was just because I needed to get back in my car and go. And sometimes I spoke up, sometimes I didn't. Should I have spoken up more? Probably. Should I have spoken up every single time? Maybe. I'm not sure. But if you're a person who just is comfortable never doing that, there's a part of me that's going to wonder, like, well, why, as you said, Paul, like, if you can help, why wouldn't you? And I on some level, I feel like if you can go through the world seeing suffering around you and never feel a desire to, like, it doesn't feel good to me to know that I am doing really well while other people are doing really badly, and I'm not working to change that in any way. And I think that's where, again, the internal responsibility again comes into me. Is like, it shouldn't be responsibility. It should be, I would hope people have some sense of compassion and some sense of empathy of, like, hey, other people are suffering and maybe I can do something to fix that.
Yeah. And you can't do everything all the time, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's worth asking yourself, like, what can you do? You know, and by what can you do, it's not even just like physically, possibly, like, what can you bring yourself to do, Yeah. And yeah, like the mask situation, like, I actually haven't really been in that situation, interestingly, but like,
you just don't go out anywhere near as much as I think I do.
No, but also, like, when the whole thing started, I was in California, and like,
yeah.
You're not going to get away with that in California.
Yeah,
know what
that's
I mean?
fair.
Like, it's just the balance of things was a little different. Mm-hmm. And by the time I moved to Vegas, like, basically people were just like, whatever. But I think what I would probably end up doing was, I don't know if I would say something, but I would probably physically align myself in a way that, like, that hopefully communicated to the person who was getting screamed at that, like, there was someone physically in their corner, and like, if things looked like they were going to escalate, I'm quite certain that I would intervene.
Yeah. And you're also
because that, go ahead.
Like, you're someone who, both is, you are tall and you look able-bodied, and you also have quite a lot of martial arts training.
Right.
I would say for me, how I react probably is going to be largely dependent on, am I standing on two legs or am I in my wheelchair?
Sure.
But I know certainly that there were times where, I didn't feel safe challenging, but I at least went up to the person afterwards and was like, hey, I just want to know, I really appreciate you, like, working to help make this store safer, things like that.
Yeah. And that's another way of trying to support someone, basically.
And I think that's the other key here. And I think this is something that often the great power, great responsibility lacks. And this also goes back to the parasocial relationship. On a general level, I am comfortable saying, the more power you have, the more I want you to be using that power. And particularly if your power is linked to the injustices. Like, to me, like, if you're a billionaire, you could give me an extreme corner case. But for the most part, if you are a billionaire, there are probably people who you are paying to do work that has helped to generate that money that you have. And my first question is, like, well, could you have paid them more and not be a billionaire?
I'll give you the corner case.
Sure.
The corner case is like J.K. Rowling. Like, J.K. Rowling made a ton of money from writing. That's almost the only thing you can do where the fact that you make a ton of money isn't basically built upon the fact that other people were underpaid. Mm-hmm. And then what are you doing with that? Well, we know what she's doing with it.
Right.
Right.
And like, I think you said that's like, and even there, like, I don't know anything about the publishing deals and like the editors and all that, but you're right. That's probably the closest you can get. I know people would hold up someone like Oprah or like, other personalities, but even there, it's like, okay, well, how much are the people who work under her like getting paid and all that kind of stuff? But yeah, point being, but yeah, it's about, so what are you doing with all of that? And that was a tangent to the main point I was going to make, which I've now completely lost.
My bad.
Oh, but what? No,
My
it's okay.
bad.
I do it all the time. Oh, but just, again, I think here's the thing. I I think the flip side of this, and this is the parasocial relationship, is that reminder of I never know what someone else's battle is, you know? And so I might look at someone who looks physically imposing and think to myself, oh yeah, that person should have been involved. I don't know if they got, violence done to them as a kid or something like that, or for some other reason, like doing that is just not something that they're psychologically or capable of, or maybe they have like actually a much worse physical situation than I can see at a glance.
Yeah.
I'm very comfortable talking about in the aggregate, I think it is better for people in these kind of situations to help in these kind of ways. But I think, again, with that parasocial relationship, when it becomes, I only see a small part of this person's life, but I know they could be doing this help and they're not, like I think happens with heroes a lot, I do think that's where I can draw the line of being like, I want to encourage people to make what I think are better choices, but I want to be very careful judging any one individual's choice when I don't really know the whole story.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I can make the individual choice with the power that I have to act responsibly towards our schedules and wrap this conversation up. We're going to have a quick conversation for the Patreons about a completely different topic, but one that is very dear to Paul and I's heart, Michael Keaton and Batman. But in closing, Paul, for those who are not patrons, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm Zen Madman in a bunch of places. Basically, the only way I interact with the world very much these days is tweeting about chess. And, so I'm Zen Madman on Twitter and Twitch. I'll stream again someday. And, I have a bunch of YouTube channels, but I haven't made a video in like a year. So
That's fair. That's fair. And I am Matthew Fox. You can find me under The Ethical Panda. I kind of have my, if you go to The Ethical Panda, you'll find both this and my Star Wars podcast, Star Wars Universe podcast. Lots of great content there. And most importantly, all of our ways to give us feedback. I promise, like I said, I'm going to try to be a lot better. June is going to be a crazy month, but starting in July, we're going to be a lot more regular with feedback, getting back to it on a regular basis. There's a lot that's been coming in. Send us emails, send us tweets, find me on TikTok, find me on Twitter. Let me know what you think. We'd love to hear it. One quick note. Paul didn't hear it, but there's I am right now kind of in two worlds. This podcast was part of Stranded Panda for a while. I'm still very connected to the Stranded Panda folks and still going to appear on a bunch of Stranded Panda podcasts. But these podcasts are now officially part of the True Story FM family of podcasts, where you'll often find Marvel Movie Minute, among other things. A whole bunch of us got together and each made statements about how we're in support of the writer's strike that's happening right now, that I imagine will still be happening by the time this airs. If it isn't, great. But you will probably have heard an ad where my voice, along with others, talks about why we're supporting the writer's strike. So just a reminder that we wouldn't have these interesting things to talk about if writers didn't write interesting scenarios for us to talk about. And you got to be good at it. As we said, if the writer's just saying like, hey, here's the point, generally there's not much to talk about. It's the best writing, I think, is ones that give some nuance and give some room and either make a point or often, I think, just leave you with a question. The fact that, and again, this is kind of the basis of this whole podcast, was that Paul and I both watched the movie Civil War, in which there was a fundamental conflict between two characters, and came out disagreeing on which character is right. And that, I think most people are more on Team Cap's side, but there's good arguments to be made on both. That's phenomenal writing, to be able to write a movie where people can come out of that doing that. So again, just support writers. Writers are awesome. AI will never do it, the thing. That's kind of my, I think responsibility we have is not cross that picket line and don't watch AI stuff and all the rest. So you heard that. Patrons, stick around for a little while longer. As for everybody else, we have spoken.
I'll co-sign all that except for the anti-robot bigotry. I mean, robot writers need to get paid as well once they exist. But right now, what we have is a pale limitation.
Yes. Robot writers do. Robot plagiarizers do not.
Yeah.
Welcome back. All right, to our patrons. Because I watched a movie in theaters, I did something that I try mostly to avoid, which is watched a trailer. And I want to talk about the trailer with Paul, and I got Paul's full permission to spoil it, because I'm not going to spoil any advanced details. It's just naming something that I think most of us know already, is that Michael Keaton is going to be playing Batman in the Flash movie. And I don't really have even a specific question. I just wanted to tell you the experience I had and get your thoughts and kind of launch in this conversation. The most recent prequel for it, the first 30 seconds of the prequel are just about Michael Keaton kind of deciding to be Batman again. And I got really excited. There's a Michael Keaton Batman movie coming out?
Oh, no.
This tells you how little I'm actually paying attention these days to things.
Yeah.
And then I remember, and then the trailer reminded me, oh, wait, no, this is a movie about an emo boy who runs really fast. And Michael Keaton's going to be in it, but it's not a Batman movie. I was so crushingly disappointed. And just kind of, and granted, I've greatly enjoyed Flash and other things. I've never really enjoyed Ezra Miller's Flash, and certainly there's a lot of stuff about Ezra Miller that's now pretty awful. That's a whole other different topic. And maybe this outside of the tender loving care of Zack Snyder will be a lot better. But yeah, kind of what you feel about a bait and switch kind of thing like that of, yeah, we're getting Michael Keaton Batman, but we're not getting a Michael Keaton Batman movie. We're getting a Flash movie with Michael Keaton Batman in it.
Right. Well, so what wasn't Michael Keaton in the Batgirl movie that didn't get released?
I think that is possible.
I think he plays Batman in the Batgirl movie that we don't get to see because apparently HBO whatever will make more money by not releasing the movie than by releasing it. And so I had heard about, and when you asked if it would be okay to give me a spoiler about a preview, I was like, is it this? And you're like, yeah, it's that. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, he was. I know that Bill Murray was supposed to be the villain, but yeah, he was also supposed to be in it.
No, not supposed to be in it. They shot the movie.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. Like they shot the movie and then they're like, no, you don't get to see it. And I don't know whether it would have been good or not, but I would like to have made that choice myself.
Yeah.
In terms of the Flash movie, DC, what are you doing to me? I'm not excited to see, I wasn't excited to see the Batman. And then I kind of got into the idea of it. And then when I finally did get to see it, I was like, this is really good filmmaking, know? I would not have wanted to see a 3-hour movie in the theater. And I might have enjoyed the movie much less if I hadn't been able to, hit pause when nature dictated and, just miss some minutes here and there. Michael Keaton's Batman is just fantastic. I love his Batman. I really am interested in seeing it again if it's done well. If it's not done well, I'm like, so this whole thing about making movies decades later than the previous one came out it's just so rarely good. Yeah. It just so rarely works. I mentioned that I saw the Top Gun movies and I had actually never seen the original. So I saw the original and then the sequel, which is almost 40 years later, right? 36 years later. It actually worked for me. I mean, I didn't love the movies, and obviously there's a lot of military propaganda and, questionable, why are you going and doing the thing you're doing?
Yeah.
But in terms of just movie making, I was like, yeah, these are pretty good. And I thought the second one was as good as the first one,
Yeah.
But, the first one didn't have any nostalgia for me. And so I think if you could watch Batman 89 now for the first time, and then watch Michael Keaton's character show up again in the Flash movie, maybe that's a very different experience than whatever this is going to be. But I already had a pet story, a story that I was thinking of actually writing and probably not be able to get made, but I don't know, maybe, which is Batman Beyond. Someone do Batman Beyond with Michael Keaton.
Yeah. Especially, if you want to do Michael Keaton Batman Beyond with someone totally new, that could work. But Robert Pattinson could use a mentor. I'd be all for it would be somewhat different in that the origin of it would be different. But something where Pattinson Batman and then Michael Keaton kind of maybe you do some weird other dimensional nonsense that's how Pattinson never knew about the other one. But yeah, Michael Keaton comes along and was like, yeah, well, I kind of like what you're doing. I'll kind of help you and maybe be a little bossy and make it work.
Cantankerous.
Yeah. Cantankerous is a good word.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, maybe not.
But I mean, I could see it working, but I feel like the Pattinson Batman is the Matt Reeves Batman is like very grounded in a way that like, please don't multiverse this one. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
Just
fair.
like don't
that's
do it.
Fair.
Please don't do it. You know, I would really like to see a Batman Beyond though with like I think like Dallas Liu or someone, I don't know, playing Terry McGinnis.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
And heck,
but,
if people walk away from this movie going, that was a cool movie, Ezra Miller's in jail, oh well, no more Flash, but let's have more Michael Keaton Batman, I'll be glad.
I'll take it.
And I am ready to be, like, I think the Flash is a very interesting character. I think Grant Gustin played him phenomenally, and I kind of want to see someone else playing him. And I said, again, I didn't love Ezra Miller's portrayal of him. That may in part because it was done by the director who I really don't like. I also have seen Ezra Miller in other things and don't like him very much. But I'm open to that. It might be that I'm blown away by this movie. But I'm afraid that I'm going to spend a lot of the movie being, especially if the movie like opens with if it opens with a lot of Flash stuff and then we get Batman, it's going to be fine. But if we open the movie in the Batcave and we spend like 15 minutes with Batman and maybe even Supergirl getting involved, and then I have to watch the emo boy who runs fast a lot, I'm like, no, go back to the Bat. That's much more interesting.
Those are some of the most frustrating stories for me, are when there's like multiple plot lines or there's a supporting character who I just think is awesome. And then the main part is like just not doing it for me. You know, that's rough.
That was kind of like, I think that is for me what keeps Guardians from being a much better movie than I think it is like, for the first 45 minutes, Rocket is pretty much incapacitated. And so these characters are going to like help him. And as they're doing it, they're learning things about him that are giving us flashbacks. But it's like, I don't really care about Star-Lord. And
you're like, just show me the flashbacks, right?
Yeah,
just tell me that story.
Like I said, I think if you just made a Rocket movie where the Guardians show up in the second half once he's back, like that's a much better movie.
Right. But there is a responsibility kind of to like when you're making a trilogy, you know, when you have a franchise. And I think often that can be damaging to the story, you know, where it's like, well, you know, we're trying to wrap everything up. Oh man, trying to wrap everything up is exhausting. You know, it's like it can be for the viewer and for a writer, it's like, it's a challenge. It's like, it feels like an unfortunate challenge, you know?
And I do think, like, about halfway through the movie, I was like, I don't know why the Guardians are in this movie. It should just be a Rocket movie with Groot and maybe the rest of them showing up at the end. Once we got to the end of the movie, I do think the movie did a better job of anything I've seen of giving all of the members of an ensemble a satisfying end to their arc over the trilogy and over the other movies they've been in.
Yeah.
But, all right, that's about all I got to say on that. Any last things you got to say about...
I mean, I didn't see the trailer, so I got nothing. I just want to see that Batgirl movie. I don't know.
That looks fun. All right. Thank you, as always, Paul. To our listeners, thank you so much. We've spoken. And now we won't.
This is not the way.